Today I'm here with the technicians, Noah Teague. Go ahead and tell us who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. I'm No Teague from the Technician. Been working with the Technician for 3 years now, covering NC State athletics and getting into another football season here.
Absolutely. We'll go ahead and jump right into the questions. The Wolfpack remain in the rankings after 1 week of football. What are some strengths that North Carolina State presents?
Absolutely. I think the first strength for NC State is its playmakers. Obviously, last year, everyone saw Casey Concepcion, the dynamic freshman slot receiver, and he has really improved even over the offseason to the point where this season he's expected to be one of the top receivers in the entire country. He's going to be a problem for anybody that NC State faces. Just his ability to get open, his ability to rack up that yards after catch is very impressive. That's the biggest strength. But then NC State has also surrounded Casey with other playmakers. They've got tight end Justin Jolie, who plays kind of all over the place. He can line up as a traditional tight end. He can line up in the slot as a receiver. And he is a very, very impactful player. 6'3" tight end out of UConn, transferred in the number 3 tight end from the transfer portal this past offseason. And, last game out, 5 receptions, 75 yards, really showed impressive ability to create yards after catch, had a great juke move early in that game. So definitely want to watch out for him. And then on the other side of the football, defensively, I think that State has a really strong defensive line. And the numbers don't necessarily show, a ton of sack production, a ton of tackle production. And that's mainly a product of the 3-3-5 scheme that NC State runs, but they are very impactful. Defensive end Davin Van, who has been a team captain last year, team captain again this season. He is going to be an absolute force this season, kind of the team leader of that defense. And then Brandon Cleveland on the inside as the nose tackle, just swallows up blocks, great in run defense, and really allows linebackers to make plays. So that's really the two biggest areas that I would consider the biggest strengths for NC State this season.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw last year Jolie came here when he was on UConn, and there was a lot of chatter in that offseason. He ended up at NC State, so that should definitely be a fun matchup. But you also mentioned Concepcion, and that was kind of my next question. He's the obvious playmaker on the field. So, what are his strengths, and how can Tennessee slow him down by chance?
Absolutely. He's his kind of archetype is slot receiver. He's about 5'11", 180. So a smaller guy, but what he lacks in size, he makes up for in athleticism. Very quick player, coming out of Chambers High School, played with a lot of phenomenal players, including Tennessee's James Pierce Jr. So he came from a great program, was coached really well, and now at NC State, he has put it all together. Just the athleticism is off the charts with him. Additionally, he's just a very smart, cerebral player where he knows how to get in between zones, knows exactly how to beat man coverage. So it's really a tough task to try to stop KC. I think the biggest thing that Tennessee can do is try to force NC State to take away their other playmakers so that they only have KC, where, if you only have one playmaker, it's really tough to be able to beat a team. It's almost impossible to cover him one-on-one. But if you can take away those other playmakers and create a situation where State is solely dependent on Concepcion, then there's a chance that you can really start to slow down the NC State offense.
For sure. You got to have a quarterback throwing it to him. Grayson McCall, he's new to the team, but he's a veteran to the game. How does he excel in week 1, and what can he work on?
Absolutely, yes. 6-year player, 3-time Sun Belt Player of the Year, was a absolute stud at Coastal Carolina. And he was someone that I think a lot of NC State fans were very, very excited about, bringing him in after what was kind of a train wreck at the quarterback position last season. He brings with him a ton of experience. He's thrown for over 10,000 passing yards. He's really known for being an accurate passer. Last week against Western Carolina was a little shaky, probably the biggest crowd he's played in front of going from the Sun Belt to the ACC. Things were a little off actually, guys, but I think that this season, especially this week, next week, that'll improve as he gets more comfortable with the personnel, playing in front of bigger crowds. against the Catamounts last week. He was very comfortable, especially throwing to the right side of the field. That was kind of his sweet spot. The left side of the field and the middle were a little more questionable. So I think for Grayson McCall, working on being able to use the entire field rather than just the right side is going to be very critical, especially making sure that he gets the accuracy. He's the type of quarterback where he's not going to push the ball downfield a whole lot. Took a few shots last week down the field, but not a ton. He's mainly going to try to, take his 5 yards, take his 10 yards, and just slowly but methodically work his way down the field. So that's what he does best. And then just working on the accuracy. But that'll come with reps with the personnel that he's working with.
For sure. The defense, on the other hand, they were top 3 nationally in interceptions last year. Now with 1 week down, allowed 21 points to Western Carolina. How are they looking early on?
Yeah, under defensive coordinator Tony Gibson, NC State has been a defensive force. Obviously, a big part of that was Peyton Wilson, the best linebacker in the entire ACC last season. So taking him out of the equation definitely makes things a little bit more tricky for this NC State defense. But I think that they should still be solid. The scheme they used, 3-3-5, it's very high pressure on the linebackers. So that's really the position group that I want to watch this week. Caden Fordham, he unfortunately got a targeting call 5 plays into the game last week, so we couldn't really see what he looked like as the new starting middle linebacker. But we did get to see Devon Betty and Sean Brown. Brown moved down from safety last season to linebacker to be kind of a weak side linebacker for the Pack. Was solid in his debut, but we're going to need to see more from him if State's going to be able to stop this Tennessee defense. And then Devon Betty, who just a solid, steady player in his 6th season with the Wolfpack. So those two bring a lot of experience. Fordham, younger player, but a lot of upside there. Very interested to see what they can do with Fordham. He's going to be really, really important to stopping that Tennessee run game that, as you know, is a very, very lethal attack. In the secondary, NC State has some question marks, a lot of new pieces, but they do bring back Aiden White, one of the best cornerbacks in school history for NC State. Went into the transfer portal last offseason before ultimately choosing to stay in Raleigh. Over the past 2 years, he did not give up a single touchdown to a receiver. He did give up a touchdown last week against Western. So maybe, shaking off some rust to open up the year, but he's a very reliable player, a little bit undersized as a cornerback, but he's going to be solid. On the other side, there's a little bit of position battle between Brandon Cisse and Corey Coley. Cisse, second-year player. Coley is a Maryland transfer. Those two are going to be battling out. Probably going to see both of them on the field, although Cisse will likely start. And then at safety, NC State has some really, really good playmakers. Bishop Fitzgerald, who didn't see much action last year, who's a former JUCO safety, really improved over the offseason, took one of the starting roles, really good coverage player. We saw that in the first drive of the game for NC State's defense, where on a 4th and short, he had a huge pass breakup. So definitely want to watch for him. He's the type of player where if someone's going to get a pick, he could certainly be that player. And then DK Kaufman, who with some of the inexperience at linebacker, he really cleaned up a lot of running plays. Going to need him to be really solid again. He was an Auburn transfer, not elite in coverage, but very good run defender. So he's going to be very critical for this NC State defense. And like I talked about earlier with the defensive line, very solid unit. They give a very strong floor to this defense.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned some changes in that secondary. One of those, Devin Boykin, will be out Saturday after leading the team last year in interceptions. Who's been stepping up in his place?
Absolutely, yes. So Boykin, unfortunately, had a bad injury during bull prep last season. So he's been out for a while. So fortunately for the staff, they've known they're not going to have him for a while, probably not going to get him till October. And so in his place, DK Kaufman has really stepped up, the Auburn transfer. And so watch for him to be kind of in that safety role.
For sure. Then head coach Dave Doeren, how has he discussed the team's approach going into this game?
Yeah, he's talked about this as kind of a one game at a time. I think they may have overlooked Western Carolina a little bit, as we saw. They kind of struggled with them early, and then kind of pulled away late. But I think he's trying to, not look too far ahead, not look at the ACC slate, where one of NC State's biggest goals this season is to win the ACC. Before getting into that, he wants to be able to take care of non-conference. So he talked about, taking things one game at a time. This is a really big game for him specifically. He's kind of struggled a little bit in these big neutral site early season matchups. He's also struggled a little bit in ranked on ranked matchups where he's only 2-8 in ranked on ranked matchups. So very important for Doran to get this win. This could be one of those wins where, you put this at the top of your list of accomplishments as, one of your best wins here. Tennessee, absolutely, as you guys know, has a very phenomenal squad. And for Doran, this would be a huge accomplishment to really get that signature non-conference win that NC State has been missing for the last few years.
Definitely. You mentioned, once again, it's a neutral site game in Charlotte. That means that neither side has a home field advantage. How do you foresee maybe the crowd being split in this one?
Yeah, I think that, these are two fan bases that go all out in a lot of sports, but especially in football. As you guys know, there will be tons of Tennessee fans, Knoxville, not too far away from Charlotte. And then, of course, for NC State, it's in state, about 3 hours away from Raleigh. There'll be a lot of state fans here. I expect it to be close to 50-50, maybe a slight edge towards Tennessee fans, but definitely going to be a packed house. Probably going to have 65,000 plus in a Panther stadium that, holds about 70,000. So should be a great crowd for the Wolfpack and the Vols.
Yeah, absolutely. It's only about 4 hours from here. So yeah, it's pretty close, as close as you can get to the middle for both sides. But, we talked about it a little bit. Struggled last week a little bit against Western Carolina, but then separated themselves in the end. What kind of sparked that winning effort?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference was the offensive line, where NC State really struggled up front for the first three. Definitely a concern. You're not going to want to struggle on the offensive line against Western Carolina. Really get things going with the offensive line. I was looking beforehand at some of the stats with the Wolfpack through the first three quarters. They only averaged about 3 yards per carry. However, in that fourth quarter, they averaged 12 yards carries. So the run blocking really improved in the fourth quarter. They really started to wear down that Western Carolina front. And so I think for NC State, definitely want to get the offensive line going before the fourth quarter, as that was their biggest area of weakness offensively. And then defensively, with their linebackers, just that inexperience really showed up. There's a couple of missed tackles, some plays where linebackers just kind of shot the wrong gap. But I think for NC State, get more reps in, get more, action in real games like they did last week will give them, a little bit better knowledge for what they should do in those situations. So watch for linebacker play and the offensive line to hopefully be a little bit improved. But that was kind of where they struggled the most last week.
Yeah, behind that offensive line, Jordan Waters put up over 100 yards last week, a pair of touchdowns. Where does he factor into the offense?
Yeah, he's going to be very, very crucial for this NC State offense. Last year he was at Duke and he really tore up this NC State defense. So I think they saw that, this is a good player. They want to add him to the team. So they brought him in. And I think he is one of the X factors for this game, where if he struggles in this one, NC State doesn't have much of a shot. But if he does play well, then that gives NC State a really good shot in this one. He's a little bit more of a power back type, almost like a bowling ball, where you give him the football and let him just start running through defenders. And then additionally, behind Jordan Waters, NC State has a couple of younger backs in Hollywood Smothers, who very fast player, almost the opposite of Waters, in that, he's going to get the ball and just immediately go, and he can turn on the jets 0 to 60 just like that. So watch for Hollywood Smothers, as well as Kendrick Raphael, younger back, who's kind of in the middle play style wise between those two. But it's really going to be a 3 running back attack with Waters leading the charge, especially in short yardage situations and in the red zone.
Yeah, that definitely scratches one of my questions off the list. Was going to ask about an X factor, but I guess you went ahead and said it. Jordan Waters is the guy to watch. Um,
Absolutely.
in that first game, the stats when you look at them show that NC State coughed up 3 fumbles, didn't lose any of them. How did those come up, and is that something of concern?
Yeah, I think it was, a little bit playing a little sloppy. Western Carolina, coming in, being very focused. For NC State, they have to have two hands on the football, but this is a situation where they didn't really struggle too much with fumbles last season. So it appears like it'll probably be just kind of an isolated thing, but definitely a concerning trend to watch for NC State. But it's not something that I expect to continue too much throughout the season.
Absolutely. What are some keys to success maybe for NC State this weekend?
Absolutely. Well, like the first thing I mentioned earlier, you got to be able to run the football. It's one of those things where whether it's 2024 or 1964, throughout all of football, if you can't run the ball, you're not going to win. So for NC State to win this game, they have to be able to run the football. I'm thinking probably at least, 4.5 yards per carry for the Wolfpack, be able to establish early down runs so that you can get yourself into second and third and manageable. That's probably the biggest key for this NC State offense. If they can establish the run, that opens everything else up. I think the second thing for NC State is defensively, the linebackers have to play very disciplined. Last week we saw, some kind of ups and downs that with Caden Fordham coming back, hopefully not getting himself kicked out with the targeting call on the first drive. This NC State team should be a little bit better at linebacker, but they have to be disciplined. Tennessee last week really showed that they can run the football, and so NC State has to be able to stop that run, at least somewhat be able to slow it if they want a shot in this one. So being very disciplined, making sure to read the defense well, hit the right gap, and then be able to finish tackles as well. So for me, it's the linebackers and the running backs in this one that are the biggest X factors for NC State.
For sure. Aside from maybe a win, what would a successful Saturday look like for NC State?
Yeah, I think for NC State, the biggest thing they want to do is kind of announce their presence nationally. This is one of the programs where they've won a lot. Most years they're winning 8, 9 games, but it's almost like they're a very anonymous program outside of the ACC. And so I think for NC State, just being very competitive with Tennessee, taking this one all the way down to the wire would be huge. Obviously, it's prime time, ABC, Kirk Herbstreit on the call. All eyes across the country are going to be watching this one. So for NC State, it's going to be very important to be, very competitive in this one and to also have good moments on both sides of the ball. You can't just have good offense or just have good defense. One of the things we've seen from State the last few years is that the defense has been very ahead of the offense where, maybe the defense shows up, plays really well, and the offense can't find ways to score. You think back to a couple of years ago when they went to Clemson, it was, again, similar situation, ABC, prime time, game of the week, and the offense just could not find the end zone for most of that game. So for NC State, it's going to be, showing that on both sides of the ball, they're very competent and keeping it very competitive, I think would make for a successful Saturday, regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, you definitely mentioned it's a big game, prime time. You have Kirk Herbstreit on the call, so obviously a lot of people tuning into that one. Tennessee, on the defensive side, they present a strong defensive line that's as deep as it is talented. How do the Wolfpack combat that? Such as any offensive lineman, maybe?
Well, I think as anytime you have a pass rusher like James Pierce Jr., it's almost tough to combat that to the point where you stop them. You kind of are just hoping that you can slow them down a little bit. NC State has probably one of the most experienced offensive lines in the entire country. They returned 4 starters from last season that have 63 combined career starts. And then they brought in Notre Dame center Zeke Correll. So a lot of experience on this offensive line, but it's been very up and down. Last season was very up and down. I think for NC State to have a good game, they're going to need left tackle Anthony Belton to really show up. The past few years, he's kind of shown up in kind of some NFL discussions as a guy who, he's a massive offensive lineman, 6'6", over 350 pounds, just a guy who is an absolute mauler. He's going to have to show up and play really well in one of the biggest games of his life. On the other side of the line, right tackle Jacarius Peak was not really playing much until midway through last season. As soon as he came into the lineup, State started to win. He's a really, really good run blocker, but the pass blocking was a little iffy last season. He's going to have to step up and do probably his best pass protection of his career here at NC State. So for me, I'm watching both of these tackles and seeing how well can they hold up against a very ferocious NC State, or sorry, a very ferocious Tennessee defense.
Yeah, definitely. We only saw James Pierce for 10 snaps on Saturday, so that's another matchup I'm going to be watching because we didn't really get a sample size of them in game one. On the other side of the ball, Tennessee found 717 yards of total offense against an inferior opponent, of course. How does NC State match up in that department, particularly with the secondary and the Tennessee receiver room?
Yeah, you talked about Tennessee's explosive offense. I mean, there are so many weapons that it's tough to really stop Tennessee's defense. I think the comforting thing for NC State is they have a really good defensive coordinator in Tony Gibson, who has been the best in the ACC now for a few years. Lucky to hang on to him through this long. And, he's the type of defensive coordinator where he is able to make really good offenses look silly at times. Last season, he absolutely sliced up Miami's offense, didn't even allow them to score a touchdown last season. Drake May had one of his worst performances of his career against NC State last season with the Tar Heels. So for Tony Gibson, it's going to be one of the biggest challenges he's had at NC State. But if there's anyone that can do it, it is him, dialing up ball plays. In the secondary, talked about Aiden White. He's going to have to bounce back. There's a hope that, last week was just kind of a fluke after, two really good seasons as a starting outside cornerback. He's going to be very, very crucial. Typically when he's on the field, his side of the field is shut down and you have to throw to the other side. Last week wasn't really like that. So we'll see if he can bounce back. And then on the other side, going to need a lot of the young guys to be able to grow up and play really quickly with Brandon Cisse and Corey Coley.
Yeah, absolutely. With all of this being said, there's one big question left, and that's, of course, the score prediction for this weekend.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be a really close game, very competitive game, but with the way State played, especially on the offensive line, it's tough for me to pick NC State. So I'm going to go with the Vols here. I think they do win and do cover. Give me Tennessee 34-24.
I like it. Mine was a little bit different here. I think I went a little more widespread. I want to say I went 42-24. It's a really tough one to predict. I was bouncing around and really hoping it's closer than that because I don't want to have to watch a blowout at all. But
hey, Josh Heupel, I would not bet against that offense. So
yeah, it gives me a little too much hope watching last week, but of course, got to remember sometimes that it was Chattanooga and not a top 25 team at NC State. So that's all I have for today, and thank you for joining me.
Absolutely, happy to be on.
Yeah, we'll shift the focus this Saturday as Tennessee goes ahead and takes on NC State in Charlotte as that one a neutral site game. Thanks, Noah.